not a victim, a survivor, life beyond domestic violence and rape. So we are now starting a shade of gray. This shade of gray isn't what you might think. To me, not all of your life is laid out in black and white. Life's just not that simple. To me, life's a shade of gray. Gray is the mixing of your past, present, and future. Your life as a whole. Not rosy, not peachy, no blues or greens, just a faded shade of gray. Anyway, that's how I see my life, or have seen my life, I guess, for years. Easily overlooked, not really any color at all, bland, dull, easily obscured to the eye. Maybe if Peppo had lived or Uncle Larry, then maybe things would have been different. Excuse me. Maybe then, maybe not. Don't get me wrong. I'm not blaming what has happened in my life on their deaths. I just wish that things hadn't fallen the way they did. I guess I really wish I hadn't fallen the way I had. Whoever said you could always start over and make a clean start never met me. After my car wreck, I thought I could make a clean break and things would change for me. However, my reputation preceded me and just wouldn't let loose of its grasp on my life. I remember this 14-year-old girl seemed to hit it off with me. She was like a neighbor. If I remember right, she was like a next door neighbor of my grandmother's, I should say. We sat and talked a lot. We got to know each other. One day she told me she couldn't hang around me anymore because her parents thought I was too old to be around her or her friends. I remember I told my mom that it really hurt me. I figured there's no turning back for me after that. I mean, I remember that. It did hurt, you know. I was 16, going on 17. I'd been through a lot, but I wasn't trying to get the 14-year-old to do anything wrong. I wasn't trying to persuade her to do anything. We talked about boys, we talked about life, we just sat and talked. And a lot of it I just listened. And I wasn't telling her any of the bad because the bad in my life I was trying to forget. But anyway, don't ask me why. But just then my mom did a 180-degree turn. Suddenly, I don't know if she felt sorry for me or what, but suddenly she asked me one night to go out with her and her boyfriend. I should say or clarify that by the time I was between 16 and 17, my mom was getting a divorce. I said that earlier, but I don't know if you missed it. But I think I was kind of like, what? I mean, I knew she was getting a divorce, but the boyfriend that she had was a friend of my dad's, a friend of my mom's, somebody that had been around us, somebody that had basically grown up around us. And there my mom was dating him, and he was a much younger man than my mother, and really not too terribly older than me. He was, I'm guessing, 9 years older than me, maybe 10. Um, yeah, maybe 10. But I remember him being around us all the time when my mom and dad were married. And if he was 10 years older than me, that'd make him like 6 years younger than my mom. So, anyway, she asked me if I wanted to go out with them. I already said this, but I'll say it again. After they had split up, which I wasn't there for the actual first split with their divorce, but things hadn't been great for them for a long time. And like I said, her boyfriend had been a family friend of ours for years. And I remember resenting him and my mother for getting together, especially the way I viewed it. It was like, oh, maybe this is what caused the divorce. Although I really didn't know why or why it frustrated me so much, but it did. I wasn't cordial to him. At one time, I'd even had a crush on him. And now he was dating my mother. For some reason, I still to this day really never got over that. Now, looking back, I will say I'm over that now. I don't hold any grudges throughout my life like that. Well, maybe one or two. But but in his case, no, I got over it, but um I don't know, I just saw him as being a significant issue, and maybe a little bit of the fact that I was not going to accept him as a father figure. And I never really did, actually, but it did over time kind of mellow out. And the funny thing is, um, my dad's name is Danny, and his name was Danny. So my sister and even my children have always called him Dan Dan, just a nickname kind of thing. And it made it more distinct and different from my dad's name. But even though he's still in our lives, um, he's no longer with my mom. Don't get that wrong. He's not with my mother, but he has always been like a grandfather to my daughters, and now he's like a great grandfather to my grandchildren. And my one daughter lives right next to him basically, and they're really close. And um, I don't begrudge him anymore. And I don't know, I guess I guess in my viewpoint, now that I've been around as many men as I have in my lifetime, I think, unfortunately for my mother, I think that people that cheat and people that have been cheated upon tend to um, repeat. Now, in my case, and I won't say I've been crystal clean all my life because I haven't, I'll admit that. But in my case, I feel like I was always searching for, you know, happiness, love, things like that. And so in my case, as long as I was with somebody that I felt like there was a future with, I was loyal. But if they ever betrayed me or um, if I ever stopped seeing a future and just wanted out, then of course, it's kind of like if you give up on somebody, it's easier to look elsewhere. But in my mom and Dan, I'll call him that too. In their case, I felt like, I guess I felt like, okay, so my mom must have cheated and that must have tied into the divorce. And I don't know if that's true or not, so don't quote me on that. But I felt like that in the end, which um, they've been apart for a while now, but I felt like that they were together a long time. And then there was um, some infidelity on his part and maybe even on my mother's part. I'm not for sure about that either. And it's none of my business, actually. I'm much older now, and my mother's life is her life, and his life is his life. But the thing about it is, um, I feel like they possibly cheated and had something to do with the divorce. And so it's kind of full circle that it would happen again, that you couldn't be with somebody that may have the ability to do it to you what you did to someone else. I guess that's the way to look at it. And I can say that from my standpoint because people that have done that to me, especially one person, um, my son's dad, he was with me, and there was many times, I don't even have a number, that probably he did things outside of our marriage, and now he's with someone else. And of course, we're divorced, but I truly feel like it's a facade too. Because I would grant you that I wouldn't believe that he's not a flirt and that he wouldn't take an opportunity if it fell in his lap. He professes online and in his social media that she's the love of his life, and I probably shoulda, coulda seen that coming, but I didn't. But I should have seen it coming because he sung her praises even before we split. But I still, knowing him the way I do, I still doubt that there's not a fidelity issue with them. And I do think that even knowing women that are like that the way I have in the past, I think it just happens. It's just like they do it once, then they're going to do it again, and they're going to do it again for opportunity reasons. And like I said, I'm not squeaky clean myself, but I think that it just depends on happiness. If you're happy and you're with somebody that's the right person, and the only time you would ever consider being disloyal is if it was over, if you weren't happy anymore, if it was ending, however you want to put it. That's one thing. But if you are the type of person that fidelity in itself is not what you really aspire to, and so you're a flirt and you make jokes and you cut your eyes at other people and you're a looker, like it doesn't hurt to look, that kind of thing, which I've heard that comment a million times from men. Doesn't hurt to look, or it doesn't hurt to say something. You're not actually doing anything if you're just flirting. But it does. And it is not a good practice. So I don't know their business, my mother's business. I don't know it. Don't want to know it. But I just feel like that, I don't know, you can't trust relationships anymore. It's really hard for me to trust after all these years. I just don't believe people. So if somebody got with me and said, "You're the love of my life," I would never leave you. I would probably start laughing because out of all my life and all the things I've lived through, I've heard that before. I've heard it many a time. You're my soulmate. You're the love of my life. I would never hurt you. And then they do. And so after getting After having someone hurt you and hurt you and hurt you and hurt you, it gets old and you get bitter and you get wiser. And then you stop trusting people. Not that you couldn't, I mean, I'm not saying even at my age that I couldn't fall in love and be with somebody and care about somebody. I'm not saying I couldn't. I'm just saying I don't know how I would feel every day. It would be like every day they would have to I don't know, show their love, not like a romantic show. They would just have to, I wouldn't be able to fully just fully believe. So I think there would always be something between us that I would have to have um, I would have to have someone that was patient and was caring and didn't make comments when they shouldn't, or there wasn't any triggers that made me think, I've heard that before. It would have to be a very special case for me to fully trust or fully believe them. And that's hard. That's hard to say after all these years that I still carry all those things around with me. It makes me, I don't know, it makes me bitter. I'm bitter. I'll say it. I'm bitter. I just don't know that there is happiness out there. I gave up on it so long ago that I just don't believe it's ever something attainable. You know, being with somebody and caring about somebody and, you know, being a partner for life, yeah, I could probably see that. But actually thinking about how happy you are with someone or how perfect it is or how you found your soulmate, no, no. I'm pretty sure that just isn't attainable. Not these days. And for the people that that is true, I really applaud you. I think it's amazing that you found someone and they found you and life is good and you're happy and you have a soulmate that you can't live without. And I'm sure it does happen. It's just hard for all of us that it doesn't happen for. And there's a lot of us. It's not just me. There's a lot of marriages that end in divorce. And there's a lot of people that after that first divorce, they have a second divorce and a third divorce and a fourth divorce. And I guess it just goes up from there. And I always heard people say, if you've been divorced once, it might not have been your fault. If you've been divorced twice, again, maybe things just happen. But if you've been divorced more than twice and things couldn't be explained away, I guess, then could be your fault. Could be you're the problem. And now, after all the years that have gone by, and now that I'm bitter and old, I'll agree with that. You know, yeah, I look back and I see this was a problem in this marriage, and that was a problem in that marriage, and I have a point. I went through some of the toughest relationships out there, but after a couple of them, and after you've chosen a lot of bad paths, yeah, then you gotta, at some point, you gotta say, yeah, it's on you. You know, I made a lot of bad decisions and I've paid for it in many different ways. And that's what the book was all about, is explaining how I got myself in these situations, how I got out of these situations, what I learned from these situations, how I hurt, how painful and now bitter I am. But yeah, I blame every bit of all the mistakes that I made on myself. I have to atone for my mistakes, which I'll get into later, but I feel like I've pretty much done that. I feel like you can't change what you did, and I wish I could. But yeah, I'm bitter. And I don't believe, at least for me, I don't believe happiness is out there. I don't believe the white picket fence is out there. I don't believe that I'll ever have anything other than peace. And now I can honestly say I made peace with all my mistakes. I made peace with all my choices. I can't change them, but I've made peace with it. It still hurts, but again, I've made peace with it. And that's all I'll have. I'm just going to have peace and acceptance, my own acceptance. Nobody out here is going to look at me and say, I just don't believe anybody's ever going to look at me and say they forgive me or they accept who I am and what I've done. But, or the choices I've made. Nobody's ever going to do that. I truly have lost all hope. But I've made that peace and that acceptance anyway, without anybody else. I've given it to myself. It's my gift to myself that all the bad paths in life that I chose, all the things that I'm talking about, they were my choices. And I've accepted that. And if, I guess in a way, in my head, it was easier for me to say, if I can't ever have forgiveness from anyone else, at least I can have it from me. And even if I die alone, I'm okay with that. And anyway, so where was I? um, oh, getting back to the story, my mom, I guess, felt sorry for me. So she said that we were going to go out to dinner, and then, I mean, that was good enough for me, that I was going to get taken out to dinner and could get dressed up and stuff. And I remember we went to just a normal, decent place to eat. And then my mom said, let's go into the lounge, because they had like a little bar area, a lounge, you know. And it was at like a hotel slash restaurant slash lounge area. And I remember, I don't even remember what I was wearing, but I know I was dressed up and everything. And I remember I thought she'd like hit her head or something and completely lost her mind. It was the first time she'd ever asked me to do anything like that. And it was the first time I had ever been into a bar or a lounge. Um, and for that matter, any place that actually served alcohol. Before that night, I drank alcohol before around friends and things at parties, but I had never actually had like a drink in a glass and a cherry and a swizzle stick or anything. And I remember we just walked in, and I guess my mom looked at me and thought, she can pass. And I did. I passed by walking in with her and him. And I remember I ordered a 7 Up, and because of, of course, being with my mother, I couldn't actually drink alcohol. But they brought it with a cherry and a swizzle stick. And I remember I was wishing it was sloe gin or vodka or orange juice in there. But at least I had what looked like a drink. But wasn't like I had never drank alcohol. So, yeah, I remember being in this little lounge area and music playing, and it was dark. And, now I know it was kind of seedy looking, but at the time it looked like just, well, it was in the late 70s. So at the time it was perfectly normal, but now looking back, it was kind of seedy. But um, I remember as I was going to the bathroom, I noticed this man watching me. And he was standing somewhere by the door, and he was checking me out. He was still there when I returned. And I remember he stopped me, and as I was coming back in, And Matt, who was my first husband, and at the time he's just a guy standing by the door, but he became my first husband. But he was wearing glasses. I don't know if they were tinted or not, but he looked mysterious a little bit. And he had the whole polyester Saturday Night Fever thing going on. And it kind of made me laugh. I do remember that. I mainly remember it made me laugh because, I just had been with young men. And here's this guy who, he looks young enough, but he looked like something you would see in a lounge. And I was definitely young. Anyway, he asked me to dance. And I remember I accepted. And we danced to a slow song. And truthfully, he wasn't a very good dancer. But it was the thought that counted. And we talked a bit. And he asked me how old I was. And I thought I'd just let him take it for granted that I was over 21 because I'm not supposed to be in a bar. And I didn't know if he would tell if I was honest. I mean, after all, I was 17 then. And so I didn't want to say that. I didn't even want to say 18, 19, 20. I just let him believe I was over 21. And I remember for an instant, I thought maybe this guy could turn my whole life around. Not because I was like immediately infatuated or anything, but you got to admit, I had been through hell. And after the wreck and after everything that had happened, I wanted just to like leave it all behind. All the parties, all the kids I knew, all the bad stuff that had happened to me. I just wanted to leave it all behind and be with somebody normal. And yeah, finding a guy at a bar isn't necessarily a good thing. But in my head, I was like, well, mom did bring me here, and he's older, and I don't know, maybe it'll work. I was just so desperate to have anybody. Really, I was that desperate. Anyway, I remember we talked for a while about the usual things, and his name was Matt. He was 27 years old, and I was 17, so he was exactly 10 years older than me. And I remember his questions came out quickly, and I stuttered to answer any of them. I just got, when he asked me, like, so do you go to school? What do you do? I said, nothing really. I just got out of college. And he said, do you want to go out next weekend? And I said, in my head, I was like, oh, am I crazy? What am I doing? I'm only 17. I couldn't believe it. I gave him my number and I left. And he said he'd call me and he'd get directions. And I don't know why everything played out the way it did, but yeah, maybe it was fate that I had gone with my mom that night. I don't know.